Well, folks, welcome back to 12 Hats Radio. And today I've got a very special guest. We've got Ian Collins, originally from Perth, but now lives over in London. And Ian's been, what can I say about Ian? He's filling out the adventure archetype quite well because he's gone off some of the, let's say, I dare say, off the beaten track countries that we're not normally thought about and teaching them entrepreneurial skills amongst other things. And absolutely delighted to have Ian, especially because he's been to one country that's really been driving my curiosity for the last, God knows how long. And that's, of course, North Korea. And Ian, thank you very much for coming onto the show. And first and foremost, can you give us a rundown on what you're all about?
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, great to be on. And I think it probably makes sense to start at the end and work backwards. And I was in Pyongyang a couple of years ago, and a colleague of mine through the work we do through Choson Exchange, which I'll talk more about. We actually got invited to go and meet with the minister for the Committee for Cultural Relations with Foreign Countries, and he reports directly to the big dog, the supreme leader, Kim Jong Un, and
Hmm.
it was on the anniversary of North and South Korea's first meeting after a long time together. So we thought it'd be a nice gesture to send him a bouquet of flowers to pass on to the supreme leader, and best wishes for continued peace talks and good health. And I remember sort of walking away from that meeting, and my colleague said to me, I don't know what decisions I've made in my life that sort of have led up to this moment of sending flowers to Kim Jong Un. But I could certainly resonate with that, and had me really reflect on how did I get to this position. And largely my life has been about wanting to just contribute and make the biggest difference that I can. I'm very much driven by the opportunity to contribute wherever I see fit, and ultimately that led me to North Korea, and using entrepreneurship as a viable way to do that. But I come from initially a personal development background, and growing up in Perth, sort of in the early 2000s, with the resource boom starting to kick off, I got into that world, and mining, and then eventually oil and gas, and still that curiosity about what makes people tick led me
Hmm.
to shift from drilling to more of a the safety space, and really wanting to see people get home safely to their families. So specialised over the past few years in a science called human and organisational performance, which is all about understanding how and why people make mistakes, and how we can control those systemically and reduce the likelihood that people will make mistakes, and at the same time equip them with tools and techniques to reduce that likelihood for error. So have had the privilege of really flying around the world for the past 10 or so years, um, working in all sorts of different countries and cultures, and people and backgrounds, just really understanding what drives people, because no one goes to work to get hurt or to hurt others or to
Yeah.
damage stuff or to impact the environment negatively. So really understanding what has it that has people take actions that are ultimately leading to these bad outcomes, and that's taken me to all sorts of different places. And it was in sort of the when the oil price, we work so much with oil, and the oil price started tanking, so we started to look outside of that industry, because the tools are just as applicable in any industry. And that's when I stumbled across this opportunity to go to North Korea. I'm not sure how the algorithms typically work, but I think it had seen me travel to places like Libya and Saudi and the Congo and so on, and thought, well, North Korea is obviously next on your list, so that's how I ended up there.
Yeah. Fantastic. And really, how entrepreneurial are North Korean people?
Surprisingly so, and it's something that really struck me, and wanted me to understand how did this come to be? How did North Koreans come to be very entrepreneurial, and largely came from necessity, and
Mm.
in the particularly the late 80s, 90s, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, and they were North Korea's sort of biggest support in a number of ways, coupled with devastating famines that really hit the country hard, and upwards of, and no number isn't, it's not known, but upwards of millions sort of lost their lives to famine. And the people that's relied on the public distribution system that was just failing at the time, they were the ones that really suffered. But it was those people that just started to go and trade and barter whatever they could were the ones that survived that period in time. And it's sort of set in motion this entrepreneurial culture where those, the people had to really trade and barter to be able to survive in that system. And so over time, these grey markets emerged, and more people started to go and trade and started to actually generate probably more money than they were from their government jobs. But what they lacked was any sort of formal education in terms of how to take a good idea and turn it into something valuable for the market.
Interesting. And really, and what also, what are like how they're how hospitable are North Koreans as well? I mean, we always see the marches on telly, and we always see when people go over there, they always go on some sort of guided tour. But
yeah,
what are everyday North Koreans like? And
and going there, obviously it's quite interesting because I saw this ad to go and teach entrepreneurship in North Korea, which struck me as bizarre to begin with. I couldn't believe that such a program exists, and it was set up. It's a Singapore-based NGO called Chosun Exchange, set up by a guy called Jeffrey C. in around 2010, and he had gone to North Korea as part of his MBA program, and what struck him at the time was people's hunger for outside information, getting any sort of foreign textbooks or anything like that. It was just so hard there, and it really sparked this sort of idea in him. And he did there was a number of years of laying the foundations for actually being able to go in and teach entrepreneurship. We were eventually allowed to do so. And so when I saw this ad, I'd always wanted to go to North Korea. It had been a place of fascination for me as well. But I also knew that going as a tourist, it would, you don't really get to see what North Korea is all about. And so this really just jumped out at me and thought, what an incredible opportunity to get to see the country above and beyond, what the tourists get to see and engage with everyday North Koreans. And I think the biggest thing that it did for me was really humanise them. And at the end of the day, they're people just like you and me that just want a better life for themselves and their families. They're just born into a very unique system where the only way to really get ahead in that society is there's a class structure in place, and depending on you're either loyal, neutral, or hostile to the regime. And the only way to really get ahead is by showing that loyalty to the regime.
Fascinating.
But the thing, and that's what we tend to see on the media, those those huge outpourings of grief whenever one of the leaders dies, or screaming and just absolute devotion, because ultimately that's how you get ahead there. But at the end, like I mentioned, at the end of the day, they're just people that just want a better life. They're just born into just such a unique system.
Absolutely. And what is one myth about North Korea that we wish to dispel right now? Clearly, Kim Jong-un is an awesome golfer, but Kim Jong-il, rough.
Yeah, he's an incredible golfer. There's a lot of stories, and in fact, one of my sort of prized possessions is a series of books called Anecdotes of Kim Jong-il's Life, and there's some just incredible tales of the dear leader. But in terms of myths, there's a lot of myths about North Korea, and things like no access to information, and to a large degree, they are very like to be able to even go and read an international book, the security protocols at the Grand People's Study House, which is basically like a large library, just to be able to read Harry Potter or something like that is quite incredible. And it's all sort of logged who's got what book and who's reading what. But certainly over time, there seems to be more and more information getting into the country, whether it's smuggled USB sticks or whatever it is. But in terms of people's access to internet, certainly what we've seen over the more recent years is more and more people having smartphones, and what they seem to do is get a smartphone from China and then re-engineer it and put a North Korean brand on it. There is actually a pretty reliable 3G network in the country. Just most people don't have access to it unless you're a government official or a scientist doing research, and as you can imagine, it's very heavily monitored what they're looking at. Most people have access to is an intranet, and this is largely state-run websites that people can access, and they're a lot more technically advanced in a number of ways, and still a lot of opportunity for sort of catching up to the international arena in terms of some of their technological advancements. But they're well aware of global trends, and even speaking to people, they're aware of social media. They just don't necessarily have access to it, but they're certainly aware of all the latest apps and just global trends, which often surprises me. The App Store in itself, to give you an example, we were running an entrepreneur workshop. We tend to run 3 workshops there during the year and try and bring North Koreans out at some stage to a country around Southeast Asia. We try to do once a year. Obviously, with COVID, we haven't been able to travel, but last time we were there, we had a team. We run these workshops. They're very much like a boot camp. And for 3 days, we have foreign business experts come in and deliver a workshop around a particular topic, whether it's marketing or distribution or whatever it is. And then within their teams, they come up with ideas and then present these back to us like a Shark Tank style.
Okay.
We rate them on their viability and their presentation skills, and it's a bit of fun, but it's also this is their livelihood to a degree as well. And we had one team working on some apps, which surprised me that they were developing these smartphone apps. To get an app on your phone in North Korea, though, you actually have to go to the App Store, which is a physical brick and mortar store where you walk in and you give them your phone, and they upload the app to your phone. And it was probably one of the most hilarious lost in communication experiences I've had from traveling the world, where I was trying to explain that our apps come from the cloud, and they come from clouds, and it was just a hilarious. They couldn't understand, and I didn't do it justice in terms of explaining where the apps come from. I don't really know, to be honest. But we went to the App Store and tried to just to experience it, and it's quite surreal and cute in one way, and also they're certainly much more progressive than I ever imagined they would be.
Interesting. Of course, you haven't just travelled to North Korea. You've done some other wild and interesting countries. Tell us about the time you were attacked by pirates on the Congo.
Yeah, that was an interesting one. And again, I've been lucky in some regard, and also really worked hard to be able to be in a position where I get to see the world. And went to the Congo, and it was on a drilling barge, and we were rolling out some of our programs there, we had to actually fly up to Gabon to jump on the rig. And Gabon it's one of those places that I was so pleasantly surprised. I'd never would have had Gabon on my list of go-to countries, but it was one of the most surprisingly nice places that I've been. So we landed in Gabon and then jumped on this drilling barge that was getting towed by a ship down to where we were going to start drilling in the Congo, and going very, very slowly down the waters there, down West Africa. And one day we just noticed this sort of unidentified vessel, and so there's a few of us went out on deck to have a look at what it is, and just remember I've never seen a more stealth looking boat in my life. It was just pure jet black, and it became very obvious that these are pirates. And it was like, wow, what do we actually do in this situation? And there's when you think about pirates, it's not the Jolly Roger sort of skull and bones. Modern day pirates look very different, and they have a lot of weaponry and so on. And I don't blame these people for getting into the line of work that they're in. And there's this pretty amazing documentary just came out called Seaspiracy, which really looks at the impact of commercial fishing on a global scale, and why people are then forced, with their livelihood taken away. People do what they do because it makes sense to them, and they've been doing a certain profession for so many years in a region, and then these large commercial fishing vessels come in and take that livelihood away. I mean, what are you going to do with limited opportunity? And unfortunately, they're forced into things like piracy. But I remember, we were just standing out on deck, and this vessel just started circling us a few times, and just sort of checking us out, and then they disappeared, and we sort of thought, okay, well they're going to come back at night time, and either. And in a lot of cases, they're going to take the vessel for ransom. And I learned very quickly what my insurance covers and how much I'm worth to kidnappers. And we looked at what resources we had on board, and whether we had people standing on fire cannons. If they came back, trying to prevent them boarding the vessel, and whilst we did have a gun locked away in the safe on board, versus their firepower, potential firepower, it just wouldn't be worth it. So remember, we sort of briefed everyone on what might happen, and just to be prepared. But they're either going to take the vessel for its cargo, and we didn't have any oil or anything on board. That's what we're going to go drill for. And it would just be a case of them coming on board and taking people's valuables. And I think they thought better of it. There was probably better ships out there that would be worth capturing more so than a pretty ragged-looking drilling barge that we're on at the time. But I certainly did not sleep particularly well that week, waiting for pirates to board the vessel. But thankfully, it didn't happen.
Yeah. And is there any other post-COVID? Is there any other off the beaten track countries that's on your list that you like to go to?
Oh, there's plenty, and I can't wait for the opportunity to really just start travelling freely again. What that looks like in the future, not sure. I came to London a few months ago, and being in Europe now, there's certainly some places in Europe that I want to explore. I'd love to go climb Mount Elbrus in Russia, and there's a few places in Eastern Europe that I just haven't explored much. Ljubljana in Slovenia looks like an absolutely beautiful city, and Tallinn's probably the one I've heard the best reports about in Estonia, and it just looks like this beautiful, picturesque city, and all my friends who've been there just rate it so highly. So that's certainly one. The one that I'd really love to do more of are the stands, Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan, and I'd really love to go and spend some time in that part of the world.
Yeah, the stands is certainly a very fascinating part of the world. I have to give you that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and it's a part of the world I don't know too much about either.
Mm.
But again, speaking to friends who've been there, they've just been so pleasantly surprised, and just had incredible adventures there. It's I like the off the beaten track sort of places. My first real international exposure was in Libya, and that was a real eye opener to go from living in a place like Perth, which is absolutely stunning and beautiful, and then to go to Libya during Gaddafi times and to read about, read and particularly read what the West was saying versus the reality of what it was actually like there. It was just completely different. So it really sparked in me a curiosity about wanting to go and experience somewhere firsthand in more of those off the beaten track type places, and have an experience for myself.
Good stuff. And finally, Ian, before we wrap up, have you got a light-hearted story to share with my listeners?
Yeah, a few, and I mean, I'll speak. That going to Libya for the first time and flew to Libya, and it's again, it was such a eye-opening sort of place, and we had a week there waiting until the oil rig that I was going to join came back into port, and there was a couple of us waiting around, and being oil rig guys, eventually the thirst for a beer got the better of us, and trying to find a beer in a dry country that forbids beer and forbids alcohol in any way was no easy feat, but we managed to eventually find someone who would be willing to sell us some beer. I just remember being in the back streets of Tripoli just thinking, what on earth am I doing? And this van came screeching around the corner and pulled up to us and just slid the door open and sort of handed us half a carton of very warm Tunisian beer. We paid him, I think it was 50 US at the time. And then his car just sped off. And then we thought, what on earth are we doing?
That's crazy.
I've really got to enjoy beer. It was probably the worst tasting beer I've ever had in my life. And drinking it under threat of imprisonment or worse.
Yeah.
It was sort of one of those moments. I can laugh about it now, but I wasn't laughing at the time.
Mm.
And even just getting rid of the evidence was a hard task in itself. So.
Yeah. Well, Ian, I enjoyed our little chat this afternoon. And finally, where else can our listeners find you?
They can find me. So I run a company called Safety Coach International, and safetycoach.com is my address, and Chosen Exchange, our address is chosenexchange.org. That's the NGO that takes people to North Korea to teach entrepreneurship. So if anyone wants travel is allowed to happen again, and anyone would like to have probably the most unique experience you'll ever have in your life, get in touch with us there.
Fantastic, and I'm sure there'll be some listeners out there who will be willing to experience the Hermit Kingdom firsthand. And Ian, absolute pleasure, mate, having you on, and thank you very much for coming on the show.
Appreciate it, Dave. Thank you.
No worries. So this will be out May, June.
Cool.
I've got a bit of a backlog to get through, but I'll let you know close.
Yeah, nice, mate. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed that. It was really, really fascinating. I know I skipped a few questions, but the stories just filled in the blanks. I didn't really have to ask a few too many, so that's really great. I really appreciate it.
Hey, you're most welcome, mate. Yeah.
Yeah.
How many podcasts are you doing?
I personally host 2.5. did this one. I did another one about, it's called The Friendly Futurist, is the intersection between future tech, society, and the environment.
Yeah.
I also did the bunker list, which is more of a shits and giggles for comedy purposes. So imagine if you go down to a bunker for 2 years, what 5 luxury items would you take, and the story behind each item.
Yeah, nice.
And I produce about 4 podcasts at the moment for different clients as well.
Cool.
Yeah, so it's my little business.
Yeah, it had to look nice, mate.
Yeah.
Do you want any photos or graphics or anything?
Oh yeah, if you've got any, that'd be great if you have. What I'll do as well is close to the day, I'll make up like an audiogram video that you can share on social media.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. What make the best sort of pictures for you?
Probably more. Well, if we're talking about North Korea, something like a streetscape or something like that. Or,
Yeah.
I don't want too generic, not you, but something that just gives the theme of the episode. That might be how I sort of pictured brand this podcast.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll send through a few.
No worries, mate. So that's been uploaded, and I can let you go on your merry way. I'm just about to knock off and go for some industry drinks, so I'll let you enjoy the rest of your day.
Enjoy that. Cheers, Dave.
No worries,
Good chat,
Ian.
mate.
See you, mate.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.